She didn't go looking for him. She didn't even plan the trip. But one quiet night by the ocean, a stranger gave her something no one else ever had, his full presence. Have you ever needed a break from everything, just to feel yourself again? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt seen? This isn't a story about soulmates or second chances. It's about one night, one choice, and the unexpected warmth that stayed long after he was gone. Stay with me, because what happened after she opened that postcard might remind you of a moment you never forgot. Zaria Wells didn't leave Seattle to find anything. She left to get away. No one knew where she was going. No one asked. Not her ex, who had taken too much from her and noticed too little. Not her friends, who meant well but offered advice instead of space. Not even her co-workers, who still walked on eggshells around her since the breakup went public. She booked the trip 2 days before she left. A small coastal town she'd never visited. A cottage with no TV, no front desk, just a lockbox and a code. The morning she left, she tossed clothes in a bag, grabbed a few books and put her phone on airplane mode. She didn't turn it back on. And she didn't plan to. Carmel by the sea looked like it had fallen out of a slow dream. Narrow roads, storybook cottages, a sky that stayed soft all day. Zaria parked her car beside the trees. The driveway crunched under her tires. Her rental sat between rose bushes and sea pines, with white shutters and a pale green door. It smelled like cedar and lemon when she stepped inside. No TV, no clocks, no noise. The silence hit her chest first, not in a bad way, in the kind of way you notice your body breathing again. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, walked barefoot across the wood floor to open every window. The ocean air crept in slowly. No calls, no reminders, no one expecting anything. She wasn't running from love. She was walking away from the version of herself that had stayed too long in something empty. That first evening, she took a scarf, slipped it around her neck, and walked toward the beach. The path was barely lit, just old lanterns and flickers of dusk. She held her sandals in one hand. Her feet sank into the cool sand. The ocean stretched out endlessly, whispering in ways that didn't demand answers. The last time someone held her hand was 7 months ago, and even then, it felt forced. Tonight, she held her own. Not in sadness. In peace. She found a spot near the shore, pulled her cardigan tighter around her, and sat on a flat stone. She watched the sky fade into lavender. The wind moved her curls slightly, but she didn't fix them. She just sat, no tears, no music, just her. And it was enough. She didn't speak a word until the next morning. When she walked into a small coffee shop near the bookstore, the bell above the door rang gently. Jazz played low in the background. A few people were reading. No one was loud. No one looked up. She ordered chamomile tea and sat near the front window with her book, the collected poems of Langston Hughes. She read the same poem twice, not because she didn't understand it, but because it reached something in her she hadn't touched in a while. She didn't notice him at first, but Luca noticed her. He was across the room, sipping his espresso black. No sugar, no cream, no smile. He wasn't staring. He was watching. There's a difference. There was something about the way she held the book, gently, like it carried something worth protecting. Her drink stayed untouched. She read in silence, unbothered, unhurried, soft in a way the world rarely allowed women to be. He didn't approach her, not then, but something in him paused and lingered. An hour later, they met again, by accident, at the town's only used bookstore. Zaria was standing in the second aisle, poetry section again. Her fingers traced the spine of a paperback when another hand reached for the same one. She looked up. And he was there. Grey sweater, calm eyes, hands that looked like they worked with vines or wood. "Take it," she said, a smile barely forming on her lips. "You sure?" he asked, voice deep but quiet. "I already own it." Twice. He studied her for a second longer than most strangers would, but it didn't feel intrusive. It felt curious. He held up the book. "Good taste." "You too." They didn't exchange names or numbers, just glances. And 7 minutes of quiet conversation about the difference between Baldwin and Hughes. He liked Hughes more. She didn't argue, but she smiled again. They parted ways without promise. But that night, something shifted. Not everything that matters announces itself loudly. Some things whisper their arrival and wait to be seen. Zarya didn't see him again until after sunset. She had spent the afternoon wandering through small shops and side streets, bought a sweater, skipped lunch, took her time with everything. The air was cooler now. A breeze from the coast moved through the streets gently, like it didn't want to bother anyone. She walked the boardwalk with a paper bag in her hands, fresh handmade pasta wrapped in wax paper. She'd planned to cook it later, maybe with butter and herbs she picked up from the market. But halfway down the boardwalk, just as she passed the ice cream stand, she saw him again. Luca, leaning against the railing, holding a bottle of wine, no glass. Their eyes met. Again. He lifted the bottle slightly, like a half-greeting. She smiled, smaller this time, but more open. "Dinner?" he asked. She looked at the bag in her hand. Fresh pasta. "I've got red." He tilted his head toward the small white cottage across the street. The porch light was on. "Trade?" he added. Zarya hesitated, but her body didn't. She nodded once. "Deal." His porch overlooked the ocean, not directly, but close enough to hear it. The railing was covered in vines. A single candle burned at the corner of the table. He poured the wine into 2 mismatched glasses, took the bag from her hands, and disappeared into the kitchen. She heard him laugh softly, just once, when he opened the pasta. Dinner didn't take long. Garlic, butter, fresh basil. That was it. They ate outside. No phones. No interruptions. Only the sound of waves, cutlery against plates, and soft jazz coming through an old speaker. He didn't ask why she was in town. She didn't ask if he lived there. He poured her water before refilling her wine, asked her if she liked the music, if she preferred silence. She told him about her bookstore. He told her about his vineyard. "My father built it," Luca said. "I didn't want to run it, but I'm the only one left." His voice didn't shake when he said it. But he didn't look at her either. She didn't push, just listened. It was enough. By the time the plates were empty, they had shared more than names. He told her about the quietness of grapes, how vines don't ask for attention. They grow slowly. They show up only when the season is right. She told him about the poems that saved her, how she once sat on a bus for 2 hours after a breakup, reading the same line over and over until her chest stopped burning. He poured the last of the wine between their glasses and looked at her finally. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked, honestly unsure. "For not needing anything from me tonight." Zarya's eyes softened. "I needed this," she whispered. He nodded. "Me too." They didn't rush anything. Not the dishes, not the music, not the silence between them. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the steps. "Be safe walking back," he said. "I'm just around the corner." Still, he waited until she was halfway across the street before going back inside. She didn't look back, but she smiled the whole way. She wasn't sure what she expected from this trip. But it wasn't this. Not the porch. Not the wine. Not a man who didn't flinch at her pauses or try to fix her quiet. The pasta had gone cold hours ago. But something inside her had warmed. If you've ever had a moment like this, simple, unexpected and real, don't keep it to yourself. Share it in the comments. Like this video if it reminded you of something you once felt. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more quiet, powerful stories that stay with you. The next morning felt slower. Zarya didn't rush out of bed. She wrapped herself in the thick grey robe that hung behind the bathroom door and stood barefoot on the porch of her rental, holding a cup of tea she barely sipped. The ocean air was cooler than the day before. A quiet fog sat just above the sand, making the whole town feel like it had been wrapped in something gentle overnight. She didn't feel lonely. She felt suspended, as if time itself had agreed to let her rest for a while. Last night stayed with her. Not because it was romantic, because it was calm, no expectations, no false warmth, just eye contact that didn't hurry, and hands that didn't need to touch to be felt. She couldn't remember the last time a man let silence do half the talking. After a slow morning walk, she ended up back near the boardwalk. Same street, same time of day, same breeze brushing the scarf against her cheek. She didn't expect to see him again. But she did. Luca stood outside a local deli, a brown paper bag in one hand and a cup of espresso in the other. He noticed her before she noticed him, and when she looked up, his gaze was already waiting. Not a stare, just a pause. She slowed her steps. He raised his coffee slightly, like a quiet wave. She smiled. He stepped forward. "Morning." "Barely," she said, glancing at the sky. "Feels like afternoon already." "I can't tell time here," he replied. "I like it." She looked down at the bag in his hand. "Lunch?" "Sort of. I bought everything for dinner. And now I don't want to cook." She held up the paperback she was carrying. "I bought something I already own." He grinned. "So we're both avoiding something. Looks like it." They stood still for a moment. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask him to go. But neither of them moved. He was the first to break the pause. "There's a bench down the street with the best view of the coast. I was going to sit there and eat olives straight from the jar, like a barbarian." She laughed, soft and surprised. He continued, "You're welcome to judge me while I do it. I'd rather help you eat them." He blinked, once, then nodded toward the street. They walked side by side. Not too close, not too far. No brushes of skin, no flirtation forced into the air. Just steps in sync. The bench was wooden, weathered, and slightly tilted to the right. It faced the ocean at an angle, framed by wind-shaped trees and wild lavender. He pulled out olives, cheese, and 2 folded napkins. She offered to read aloud from her book. He agreed, and for 30 minutes they ate quietly while her voice filled the spaces between the waves. She didn't tell him she had felt invisible for months. He didn't tell her that after his father's funeral he hadn't spoken to anyone outside work for days. They didn't need to trade pain to feel connected. They simply stayed present. Her voice, his eyes, the way the breeze caught the edge of the page and lifted it gently like it didn't want the moment to end. "Would you want to come by for dinner again?" he asked, not looking at her. She closed the book. "Same wine?" "I've got something better." "Same music?" "Only if you want it." Zaria looked at the sea once more, then at him. "I'll bring real glasses this time." He smiled. She didn't say yes, but she didn't have to. Dinner didn't happen right away. She took her time walking back to the cottage. No rush in her steps. No butterflies fluttering like a girl caught in a dream. Zaria didn't believe in quick sparks anymore. She'd had enough of those. Sparks burned fast, then left you cold. But peace stayed with you. And she hadn't known how much she needed it until someone gave her room to feel it again. Luca opened the door before she knocked. Same porch, same candlelight, same quiet, familiar face. Only this time, he looked relieved. "You came," he said simply. She held up a bottle of sparkling water and 2 proper wine glasses. "Upgrading us from mismatched mugs," she replied, stepping past him. He followed her into the small kitchen where the table was already set. Clean plates, cloth napkins, silver cutlery. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful, centered, the kind of setting that told her he expected her to say yes, but wouldn't have been bitter if she hadn't. Zaria placed the glasses on the counter and opened the water. "You don't talk too much," she said casually. He turned to face her, eyebrow raised. "You want me to?" "No," she replied, pouring 2 glasses. "It's nice." He accepted the water from her hand and sipped slowly. "I don't like wasting words," he said. "Then we're going to get along just fine." Dinner was roasted vegetables, lemon chicken, and sourdough warmed in the oven. She watched him move around the kitchen, not rushed, not performative, just a man doing something he enjoyed. He told her his mother used to cook every Sunday, and his job was to set the table and not burn the garlic. She told him she never learned to cook with anyone, but she loved the smell of food when someone else made it. They sat down together, the candlelight softening everything between them. He passed her the bread. She poured the wine. Everything in sync, no noise, no buzzing, no background TV, just the faint hum of the oven cooling down and the occasional wind outside. Halfway through the meal, she paused. "What?" he asked. She blinked. "Nothing. You're staring." "I was just thinking," she said. "This doesn't feel like something that's only supposed to happen once." He looked at her carefully. "And that scares you?" She met his gaze. "No. That surprises me." He didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Warmer, steadier. "I don't do casual," he said. She looked down, pressing her lips together. "Neither do I. Not anymore." There was a pause between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. After dinner, they didn't clean up right away. They took their drinks to the porch. The air was cooler now. She wrapped her arms around herself, and without a word, he stood and came back with a blanket from the couch, draped it over her shoulders, sat back down beside her, not touching, but near enough. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. It was that kind of night, the kind where the moment speaks louder than words. "Are you close with your family?" she asked, eventually. He nodded once. "I was." "Your father?" A slow breath. "He passed last year." "Heart?" "Too soon." Zaria didn't ask for details. "I'm sorry." He nodded again. "Thanks." She turned her glass in her hand, watching the liquid move. "My mom left when I was 10, she offered, not out of obligation, but from a place that suddenly felt safe. He looked at her, waited. "My dad did his best, but I think I've always been searching for stillness, because I didn't have much of it growing up." "You have it now," he said softly. She nodded. "Yeah. I do." Later, they sat quietly, watching the stars start to show up, one by one. The sky was clear, the moon low. Everything felt slower than it did in her normal life. Fuller. "I should head back," she said after a long stretch of silence. Luca didn't protest. He stood and walked her down the steps, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. At the edge of the sidewalk, she stopped. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't move away. Their eyes met, and stayed. "Will I see you tomorrow?" he asked. Zaria tilted her head slightly. "You want to?" "Yes." She nodded. "Then yes." He stepped back, respectful. But just as she turned to go, he called gently, "Zaria." She paused, facing him again. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "You feel good to be around." She smiled, slow and wide. "So do you." She walked the rest of the way back, feeling something she hadn't felt in over a year. Not desire, not excitement, but safety. Not the safety of hiding, the safety of being. And she knew, deep in the quiet corners of herself, that whatever this was, whatever it turned into, had already given her more than most relationships ever had. The next day, Zaria didn't plan anything. She walked to the market again, this time slower, bought a bundle of eucalyptus, tucked it into her tote bag along with a fresh loaf of olive bread and a bottle of local honey. There was no need to look at her phone, no need to check in with anyone. No one was expecting her to explain anything. And she liked it that way. Luca texted her mid-afternoon. A single line. 6:45. Same porch. She didn't overthink it. She didn't overdo her makeup. She wore jeans and a soft linen shirt, left her hair free, and tucked the book of poems into her bag, not because she planned to read it, but because it felt right to bring it. As she walked up the small path to his cottage, she saw him already outside, adjusting the candles and setting 2 chairs beside the table. He turned as she stepped into the light. "You always show up quietly," he said. "I don't like announcing myself." "I noticed." She stepped onto the porch. He took the bag from her hand before she offered it. "Bread? And honey?" His mouth curved slightly. "You brought something sweet." She raised an eyebrow. Don't expect me to share all of it. I wouldn't dare. Dinner was slow again. Stew with lentils and herbs. The kind of meal that felt like someone had cared while making it. They ate without rushing, talked about nothing big. The weather, books, how the sound of waves at night was different than during the day. She asked about his vineyard. He told her about his father's stubborn belief that grapes grew better when no one talked to them. Did you test that? She asked. He smiled. They grow just fine when you ignore them, but they thrive when you check in without hovering. She looked at him over the rim of her wine glass. Are we still talking about grapes? Luca held her gaze. Maybe not. After dinner, they didn't sit on the porch. They walked instead, down a path lit by moonlight and the occasional flicker of lamp-posts. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few late-night guests heading to inns and one couple sharing a quiet laugh by a fountain. Their hands brushed once as they walked, but neither pulled away. Neither reached for more either. It was a quiet kind of tension, the kind that asked nothing but offered everything. He took her to a small garden she hadn't seen before, hidden behind a white archway, marked by a single word carved into stone. Breathe. The bench was warm from the day's sun. They sat together, side by side, their knees almost touching. I've never felt this still, she said. Luca turned his head slightly. Even at your place? She shook her head. That was quiet. This is still. There's a difference. He didn't reply right away, but when he did, his voice was low. I feel it too. They looked at each other. There were no distractions, no other voices, no music to break the silence, just breathing, and the closeness of two people who had stopped pretending they weren't drawn to each other. Zarya was the one who spoke next. If you're waiting for a sign, she said, this is it. He didn't move right away, but his eyes never left hers. Then, without any rush, he leaned in. His hand found her cheek. His thumb brushed a strand of hair away from her face. She didn't close her eyes yet. She watched him. He paused, an inch away, asking without words. She nodded once, and only then did he kiss her. It wasn't fast. It wasn't hot. It was slow, intentional, a kind of kiss that said, I see you, not I want something from you. His mouth was warm, his breath soft. She tilted her face slightly, responding with the same care he offered. And for a long moment, they just stayed there, moving slowly, not needing anything more than the feel of that one quiet kiss. When they finally pulled back, Zarya didn't look away. Neither did he. She didn't ask what it meant, and he didn't pretend it wasn't real. They sat for a few more minutes. Their hands found each other this time, gently, naturally, and in the middle of that silent garden under a soft moon she whispered, Thank you. Luca turned to her. For what? For going slow. He gave her hand the lightest squeeze. I'm not in a hurry. They walked back together. No more words needed. And when they reached her cottage, he didn't ask to come in. He kissed her cheek, lightly, and walked away. She didn't sleep right away. After Luca left, Zarya stood by the window in her cottage. The night was deep and still, the moonlight painting silver lines across the floorboards. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing over her lips. That kiss had stayed with her. It wasn't about hunger. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about knowing someone had looked into her and stayed. Her past relationships had always moved fast. Too fast. Fast enough to blur red flags. Fast enough to feel thrilling until reality sobered it. But this felt like someone was choosing her with both eyes open. And that made her exhale deeply. The kind of breath that sounded like peace. She spent the next morning at a little flower stand near the cafe, bought soft white dahlias, wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. Her handwriting was slower than usual. She wasn't rushing through her own thoughts anymore. That evening, she returned to his cottage again. He opened the door before she knocked. Again, same candle on the table. Same porch, same calm face. Only tonight, the air between them held something warmer. They ate inside this time. The wind had picked up. The porch was too cold. She helped him chop garlic in the kitchen. He opened wine, but didn't pour it until after the food was on the table. They talked about music, about the way some songs hurt in a good way, about how being known was scarier than being desired. Zarya told him she used to journal every day until someone she dated once read her private entries without permission. He didn't ask what the person read. He just asked, "Do you write now?" "I started again this morning," she said. "Good." That was it. Not a sermon. Not a pity hug. Just someone glad she had returned to herself. After dinner, he lit a fire in the small indoor hearth. They sat on the rug, sharing a soft fleece throw, knees touching now. Not because they had to, because they both wanted the warmth. She leaned her head on his shoulder slowly. He didn't flinch. He adjusted his arm gently so it could rest around her without pulling. No words passed between them for several minutes. Only the sound of the fire popping lightly and their breaths rising and falling with ease. Then, softly, with no shift in tone, he turned toward her. His fingers brushed her chin, guiding her eyes to meet his. She looked up, calm but open. And when he leaned in this time, she met him halfway. Their mouths met again, slower than last night, but deeper. His hand stayed at her jaw, thumb resting just beneath her cheekbone. She parted her lips slightly. He moved with care. She moved with certainty. It wasn't about seduction. It was about presence. At some point, the fire dimmed, and their kiss deepened. They shifted slightly, her hands resting on his chest, his fingers trailing down her back. There was no pressure to move quickly, but there was no resistance either. She whispered, "Can I stay?" He kissed her again, gently. "Yes." He breathed against her lips. He stood first, offered his hand, and pulled her up with quiet strength. In the bedroom, he didn't rush. He unbuttoned her shirt slowly, pausing after each one to look into her eyes. She did the same to him. Each layer removed with mutual consent, nothing rushed, nothing aggressive. His hands explored only what she allowed, and hers moved with curiosity, not caution. They undressed each other fully, then paused. No giggles, no awkward tension, just the warmth of skin, and breath, and honesty. When he laid her down, he kissed her shoulder first, then her neck, then her mouth again, and she held him, not tightly, but fully. What happened between them that night wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was steady, focused, deep. He moved like he was memorizing her. She responded like she'd been waiting to be seen, not just touched. And when their bodies finally met, fully, it didn't feel like a new chapter. It felt like a return to something they hadn't known they'd lost. Afterward, he didn't turn away. He stayed beside her, one arm wrapped across her waist, breath sinking with hers again. She closed her eyes with no fear of being used, no fear of being misunderstood. He had already seen her. Now, he was holding her too. Zarya didn't wake up startled. She woke up slowly, as if her body knew there was no need to rush back to the world. The room smelled like wood smoke and her own lavender oil. Light poured in through the sheer curtains. The sheets were soft against her skin, still holding warmth from the night before. Her eyes fluttered open. He wasn't beside her, but she didn't feel abandoned. She sat up, pulled the blanket around her chest, and looked around the room. There he was, Luca, sitting at the edge of the bed, fully dressed, holding 2 mugs of tea. He looked at her gently. "Morning." She blinked once. "You make tea for all your guests?" He smiled softly. "Only the ones who ask before staying." She took the mug from his hand. It was hot, fragrant, calming. Chamomile again. He remembered. They sat like that for a while, him at the edge, her sitting upright in the middle of the bed, sipping slowly, blanket draped around her shoulders. Neither of them rushed to fill the air. She liked that about him. Even in the morning, when people are most awkward or most eager, he stayed still. "I didn't want to wake you," he said after a few minutes. "I wasn't asleep anymore." "I know." Their eyes met again. There was no regret, no confusion, just something deep and quiet between them. She eventually slid off the bed and slipped into the robe hanging nearby. He stepped out so she could shower. When she came out, he was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. This time, she didn't stand back and watch. She joined him, cut fruit, warmed bread. They moved around the kitchen like they'd done this before. Not many times, but enough to know where the silence lived between them, and how to leave it untouched. They ate at the table with the windows open, no music, just the birds outside and the low hum of the town waking up. "Do you work today?" she asked quietly. "I'm supposed to." "You don't sound excited." He paused. "I feel calm right now. I'd like to keep feeling that." She nodded. "Same." After breakfast, she helped him clean the plates. He didn't ask her to. She didn't offer out of politeness. It felt natural. When they were done, he dried his hands and turned to her. "You want to walk a bit before you head back?" "Yes." They didn't change clothes. They didn't freshen up for each other. They just left the cottage as they were and walked toward the beach. The sand was soft that morning, damp from the night mist. Zarya slipped off her sandals halfway through the walk. Luca rolled up his sleeves and let the ocean breeze brush against his forearms. They didn't hold hands. But they didn't need to. Everything about them said, "We are comfortable." They passed a couple jogging with a golden retriever, a woman doing yoga at the edge of the shore, a father and daughter building something crooked in the sand. No one looked at them twice, but Zarya noticed how she felt walking beside him. Safe, seen. She glanced sideways at him once. He was already looking at her. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," she replied, voice clear. They sat on a low rock, shoes beside them, feet buried in the cool sand. He looked at the waves. She looked at him. "I don't want to ruin this by overthinking it," she said. "Then don't." She smiled softly. "I mean, we barely know each other, but I feel like you've known yourself better since we met." She turned her head toward him slowly. "Yes," he nodded. "I felt the same, since the first moment I saw you." Zarya blinked. "In the coffee shop?" He nodded. "You were reading Langston Hughes and didn't touch your tea. You looked peaceful, like you weren't asking the world to see you." She tilted her head. "But you saw me anyway." He nodded again. "Yeah, I did." They didn't make promises, no plans for tomorrow, but when he reached for her hand this time, she let him take it. And they stayed like that, for a long time. They walked back to the cottage in silence, not the heavy kind, the kind that comes after everything that needed to be said has already been spoken. Zarya's fingers stayed wrapped gently in Luca's until they reached his steps. He let go first, not abruptly, just softly, as if he knew it was time. She turned toward him. "I should pack," she said, voice quiet but certain. He nodded once. "I know." She took a breath. "Thank you. For all of it." He looked into her eyes, unflinching, steady. "You don't owe me thanks." "I know," she replied, "but I'm still grateful." His expression didn't shift much, but something warm moved behind his eyes. "You don't owe me anything either," she added. He studied her. "I don't feel like I've lost anything." She swallowed, throat tightening slightly. "Neither do I." She didn't want to make this goodbye harder than it needed to be. It wasn't a goodbye because something was broken. It was a goodbye because something had been whole, and that was rare. He walked her to the gate. They stood there for a long moment. She didn't hug him. He didn't pull her in. But their closeness remained, like an invisible string between them. She stepped back. "You'll be all right." "I've been better since you showed up." Zarya exhaled slowly. Her lips curved into a soft smile. "I don't know what this was," she whispered. "You don't need to," he said. "You just needed to feel it." She looked down, then back up. "And I did." He reached for her hand again, held it gently, then turned her palm up and kissed it. A quiet, careful kiss, not to ask for more, but to thank her. She held his eyes for a second longer, then she let go and walked away. Zarya didn't cry. She walked back to her rental and began packing slowly. Every item she folded felt like a piece of the weekend she wanted to keep intact. She placed the poetry book in last, carefully, left her sandals on the floor, wore her flats instead. Before she zipped her bag, she paused, looked around the cottage one last time. The scent of cedar still lingered. A breeze moved through the curtains. She had never felt more herself than she had here. The drive out of town was quiet. She kept the music off, watched the hills roll by, let the images replay in her mind, the porch, the bench, the firelight flickering against his face, his voice, the calm in his body, the way he never made her feel like she had to impress him to be held. When she stopped for gas 2 hours outside of Carmel, she stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, not for vanity, to check if the glow was still there. It was, not from makeup, not from any kiss, but from the way she had stayed true to herself, from the way she had let someone see her and allowed herself to be present without building a wall. Back in Seattle, the city buzzed the same way it always did. But Zarya moved differently. She walked slower, spoke softer, smiled more easily. At her bookstore, she rearranged the shelves, placing poetry where it could be seen first. She bought 2 new chairs for the reading nook and finally finished setting it up. One grey, one deep green. She started journaling every night again. Not about heartbreak, not about longing, about breath, stillness, warmth, presence. 1 week passed, then 2. No calls, no texts. She didn't expect any. But one afternoon, as she returned from lunch, she found a single postcard sitting on the floor near her mail slot. There was no return address, just a vineyard hill at sunset. And on the back, in steady handwriting, a single sentence, "It wasn't one night for me." She stared at it for a long moment, not because she was confused, but because her chest opened with something soft, something rare, something real. If you've ever shared a moment like this, where goodbye wasn't the end, but the beginning of knowing yourself better, tell me in the comments. Drop one word that stayed with you after a night like that, like this, if you believe in quiet love. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more moments that stay long after they're over. Seattle hadn't changed. The traffic still slowed near 5th and Pine. The same woman with the green coat and grey braids still handed out handwritten poems near the farmer's market on Sundays. And the air still smelled like coffee and wet sidewalks after dark. But Zarya had changed, not in a way the world could see. She walked the same path from her apartment to the bookstore, wore the same black coat, ordered the same chai from the cafe near the corner. But inside, she moved slower, not out of weariness, out of awareness. The first morning back, she lit incense before opening the store. The bell over the door had the same tired jingle. The light came through the windows in long, soft streaks. And for the first time in months, she didn't open the register right away. She just stood in the center of the room, let it be quiet. Let herself be still. When her assistant, Ray, came in 30 minutes later, Zarya was rearranging the front display. "You're early," Ray said, half teasing. Zarya looked over her shoulder. "Felt like being here. You okay?" Zarya nodded. "I think I'm better than I've been in a while." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You meet someone out there?" Zarya smiled, small but sure. "I met myself." That afternoon, she brought out a set of old lights she'd tucked away over a year ago. String bulbs, soft white. She hung them above the new reading chairs she'd just ordered, one grey, one deep green. She ran her fingers over the curve of each chair arm after arranging them near the poetry shelves. This wasn't for anyone else. This space was hers. To read, to sit, to breathe, to remember the stillness that healed her. Later that evening, she sat in one of the chairs with a blanket wrapped around her knees and her journal open. The pages filled slowly, not with sadness, not with longing, but with small things. The taste of wine on the porch, the sound of his voice saying her name, the steady way he listened, the safety in his touch, not possessive, not demanding, just safe. She didn't write to chase closure anymore. She didn't write to untangle pain. She wrote to remember how it felt to be seen without needing to perform. By the end of the week, people at the shop began noticing the shift. "You look softer," one regular said. "Like you just got back from somewhere, healing." Zarya smiled. "I did." She didn't tell anyone about Luca. Not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't a story to be consumed. It wasn't about retelling. It was about honoring. One night, after closing the store, Zarya walked alone down the hill toward the pier. She hadn't done that in months. The wind moved through her curls. She pulled her scarf higher around her neck and leaned against the railing that overlooked the bay. Lights blinked across the water. A ferry pulled in slowly. A couple passed behind her, laughing softly. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like something was missing. She felt full. When she got home, she made tea. Not wine. Tea. Same kind Luca had made. Same kind she brought with her on that trip. She sat at the table with the mug in her hand and her journal open again. This time, she didn't write about the past. She wrote about presence, about peace, about what it meant to finally stop proving your worth to people who never planned to see you. She closed the journal gently and looked out the window. Her apartment was still. Her body was quiet. But inside, she could feel it again. Not longing, not regret. Something real, something warm, something lasting. 2 weeks passed. Zarya hadn't thought much about hearing from him again. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't expect things to stretch beyond what they were, something real, beautiful, and brief. Some moments weren't built to be permanent. They were meant to wake you up. And Luca had done exactly that. She hadn't tried to text. He hadn't reached out either. It didn't sting. It grounded her. What they shared was honest, not performative, and it didn't owe her more than it already gave. Still, when she saw the envelope on the floor near her door, her breath paused. No name on the front, no return address, just a postcard. A vineyard hill at dusk, soft sunlight catching the edges of the vines, golden shadows stretching wide. She turned it over. One sentence, written in careful, clear ink. "It wasn't one night for me. L." She sat down on the floor, right where she stood, and read it again. And again, not with urgency, but with warmth slowly rising to her face, her chest, her fingertips. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a plea. Just a quiet truth. Simple, unapologetic, real. Zarya placed the postcard on her coffee table and didn't move for a while. She didn't call anyone, didn't take a photo to share, didn't even speak aloud. But something inside her opened, not in a desperate way, in a soft way, like a window being cracked in a quiet room. That night, she lit a single candle, poured a cup of tea, and pulled her suitcase from under the bed. She didn't pack it yet. She just unzipped it and placed it on the floor, let it sit open, as if her spirit needed time to catch up to the idea that had been waiting in the quiet part of her mind. Maybe this isn't over. Not because she needed it to last, but because she was ready to see what it could be, without fear, without pressure, just honesty. The next morning, she opened the shop early, rearranged a few shelves, and called Ray into the office. "I need a few days," she said. Ray blinked. "Everything okay?" Zarya smiled. "More than okay." Ray gave her a knowing look but didn't ask for details. "I'll handle everything," she said. "Just let me know when you're back." Zarya nodded. "Thank you." Back home, she packed slowly. Jeans, 2 dresses, her favorite robe, the same poetry book, and the postcard. She tucked it inside the cover. She didn't know what she was walking into. She didn't have a return ticket yet, but she didn't need one. She drove this time. Same route, same quiet stretches of road, but everything felt different. Not because of him. Because of her. Because this time, she wasn't escaping anything. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't lost. She was curious, ready, alive. As she approached the edge of Carmel and turned toward Napa, her fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. A flutter stirred in her stomach. Not nerves, Anticipation, the kind that comes when you're not chasing someone, but you're answering something that feels unfinished in your chest. She reached the vineyard close to sunset. The driveway was long and winding. Grapevines stretched across the land like poetry written into the earth. When she parked near the front house and stepped out, the breeze carried something, soft, ripe fruit, warm soil, and faint wood smoke from somewhere far off. She looked around. Then she saw him. Luca stood near a tree by the tasting room, speaking to a staff member. He turned his head slightly at the sound of her car door, paused, then looked again. When he saw her, really saw her, he stopped speaking mid-sentence. The staffer looked confused, then quietly excused himself and walked away. Zarya didn't move, neither did Luca. For a moment, the space between them felt suspended. Then he walked toward her, calm, steady. And when he stopped just a few steps away, he said the only thing that mattered, "You came." She nodded once, eyes steady. "You sent a card." He smiled slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting with quiet relief. "I meant it." She let the silence stretch between them, just long enough to feel the weight of the moment. "I'm not here with expectations," she said softly. "I know. I'm not chasing anything. I don't want you to." They stood still, facing each other under a tree as the sun dipped behind the hills. Then he asked, voice lower, "Now, are you staying for a while?" Zarya tilted her head, just slightly. "I packed light. But I left room." He smiled again, full this time. "Come inside." The air inside the vineyard house was cooler than she expected. High ceilings, wooden beams, large windows that pulled the afternoon light into every corner. It smelled like clean oak and aged fruit, earthy, warm, and settled. Zarya stepped in slowly. She didn't trail behind him, but she didn't rush either. Luca led her into a sunlit room near the back. It wasn't polished or staged. It felt lived in. A chair with a flannel shirt draped over the arm. 2 open books on the table. A nearly empty wineglass beside a half-solved crossword puzzle. He didn't try to explain any of it. He just gestured toward the seat across from him and said, "You want water? Wine?" She sat down slowly. "Water, just for now." He poured it for her, handed her the glass, then sat opposite her, close enough to speak softly, far enough to give her space. Zarya took a sip. "I didn't know if I'd actually come." He didn't move. "I didn't know if you would either." They both paused. She ran her finger lightly along the rim of the glass. "But when I saw the postcard, something shifted. I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I felt like I was being invited." Luca nodded slowly. That's exactly what it was. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full of quiet thoughts. Mutual respect. Zarya looked out the window. "The vines are beautiful. They're stubborn," he said with a faint smile. "They take their time, make you wait. But they show up when they're ready." She turned back to him. "I've changed a lot since we met." "I can tell. Have you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Not because I missed you, but because you reminded me who I was before things got loud." That line stayed in the air. Before things got loud. She understood that more than she expected. They talked for over an hour. Not about the night they shared, about everything around it. The kind of stillness they both craved. What their mornings looked like now. The books that changed them lately. The moments that made them pause without knowing why. There was no tension, no seduction, only clarity, only presence. At one point, Zarya asked softly, "Why didn't you text me after I left?" Luca's answer was calm and direct. "I wanted you to keep what we had without letting expectation distort it. I didn't want to invade your peace." She exhaled. "You didn't," he added. "I also didn't want to chase you. I wanted to be ready. In case you came back." Zarya stared at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I think that's the most respectful thing anyone's ever said to me." Outside, the light was shifting again. The golden hour had arrived. Luca stood and reached for her hand, not to pull her, but to ask. She took it. They walked out the side door and followed a dirt path through the rows of vines. The leaves brushed gently as they passed, whispering low in the breeze. He pointed out the varieties as they walked. She asked questions, not to impress him, but because she liked learning what mattered to him. They paused near a patch of shaded vines. The sun dipped lower, and when she turned toward him, he looked at her with the same eyes from that first night, curious, calm, unafraid to wait. "I'm not here to escape anything," she said. "I know. I'm not here to fix you or fill space or rush into something. I wouldn't want that. I'm here because I want to see what this can feel like when there's no goodbye waiting around the corner." Luca stepped closer. He didn't smile big. He didn't get dramatic. He just nodded, once, and said the most honest thing he could. "I'm still exactly where you left me." The kitchen lights were soft, golden. Zarya stood at the counter, slicing figs while Luca stirred something on the stove. The windows were open. A breeze drifted through, carrying in the scent of earth and pine from the vines outside. They moved without needing to fill every moment with sound. There were glances, half smiles, and the kind of closeness that grows in quiet repetition. He handed her a small spoon filled with sauce. She tasted it, closed her eyes for a second, then nodded. "Perfect," she said. "I trust your taste," he replied. She smiled, but didn't say anything. It wasn't the words that made her feel good. It was the trust. They ate on the back patio, tucked between 2 rows of vines. A table set for 2. No music. No distractions. The sky overhead shifted from gold to indigo. Zarya sipped her wine and asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" He thought for a moment. "I used to. Right after my father passed, everything felt too heavy. I didn't know if I was capable of holding it. But you stayed." "I stayed," he said, "because eventually I realized it wasn't about being capable. It was about being present." Zarya nodded slowly. "That's how I felt about going back home." He looked at her. "You were different when you arrived." She met his gaze. "You are too." They didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. After dinner, they didn't clean up immediately. He walked her through the vines as night settled. Fireflies blinked low in the grass. She reached for his hand, naturally this time, and he took it without hesitation. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about what felt real now, about how good bread tastes better when someone makes it slowly, about how peace doesn't always mean stillness. Sometimes it means shared presence with the right person. They returned to the house. She didn't ask to stay. He didn't offer. But when she followed him inside, and they both instinctively moved toward the bedroom, it was clear. This wasn't about recreating what had already happened. It was about continuing something honest. This time, there were no firsts to cross, no uncertainty to silence. They undressed more easily, not carelessly, but with a knowing tenderness. Each layer felt like a welcome back. Her shirt fell to the floor. His hands rested on her waist. Her fingertips moved slowly over his chest. They kissed like people who remembered how each other breathed. Not with urgency, but with memory. They moved together in bed, like a rhythm had returned. Zarya didn't hold back. She didn't shrink. She didn't hesitate to guide his hand. He didn't fumble, didn't force. He read her slowly, responded even slower. There was space for softness, for pressure, for silence. No performance, only presence. When she finally laid against him, legs tangled, breath uneven, he held her tighter. His lips pressed to her shoulder, then her back. She turned toward him in the dark. "I didn't think I'd come back," she said. "I didn't think I'd stop thinking about you," he replied. She smiled softly. "That's dangerous." He nodded. "Or honest." She leaned in, kissed him once more, then rested her head on his chest. "I'm not rushing anything," she whispered. "Good," he murmured. "Neither am I." They fell asleep like that. No alarms set, no plans made. Just 2 people who had once shared one night, now sharing something lasting. Morning came gently. No alarms, just sunlight slowly stretching across the sheets, creeping up her bare back. Zarya turned her face into the pillow and breathed in deep. She wasn't surprised to find the space beside her empty, but still warm. She rolled onto her side, pulled the blanket across her body, and let the stillness settle in for a moment before getting up. The house was quiet, but it wasn't silent. Somewhere in the kitchen, she could hear water boiling, light footsteps, the shuffle of dishes, the day beginning. Softly, she found her robe on the chair, slipped it over her shoulders, and walked barefoot into the hallway. Luca stood near the stove, already dressed in a fitted grey shirt and dark jeans. He moved calmly, placing slices of bread into the toaster and pouring hot water over loose tea leaves. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, he smiled like he'd been waiting all morning to see her. "You sleep okay?" he asked. Zarya nodded, walking over slowly. Still floating, he chuckled under his breath. "Good floating." She stepped beside him and leaned into the counter. "Peaceful, honest, real. That's all I ever want to give you." The words landed quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They ate breakfast outside again. Toast, fresh fruit, tea with honey. The sky was overcast, but it felt good, cooler, softer. Zarya watched Luca speak to one of the vineyard managers from across the lawn. His hand gestures were relaxed. His posture was grounded. She saw something in him she hadn't seen before. Not mystery, not charm, but steadiness, and it made her feel safe in a way that was new. When he returned, she reached for his hand without thinking. "What time do you start?" she asked. "I'm free this morning," he said. "You planned that?" He nodded once. "Didn't want to miss the chance to be slow with you." Zarya smiled, brushing her thumb against his fingers. "Then let's walk." They wandered the upper hills of the vineyard, where the view stretched far beyond the property. From the edge they could see the road winding into the trees, the shimmer of water far off, and the sloping rows of vines lining the valley like soft waves. Zarya let the wind move through her curls. She closed her eyes, held onto his arm. "I like this version of me," she said suddenly. Luca glanced at her. "Which version? The one that doesn't need to be anything except still?" He stopped walking and turned to her fully. "You were always still. You just didn't have permission." Her eyes stayed on his for a long moment, and then she whispered, "Thank you." For seeing her, they found a bench near the highest point of the hill, no one else around. He sat close beside her, their legs touching, and handed her a grape from his pocket. It was chilled, sweet. "Do you ever want kids?" she asked. It wasn't forced. It wasn't loaded. It was curiosity. He thought for a beat. "I didn't, for a long time. Not because I didn't want to be a father. I was just afraid I'd repeat things I didn't like. And now." He turned toward her. "Now, I think I'd want them if I was with someone who raised them with presence, not perfection." Zarya nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She didn't answer the question for herself. He didn't press. Later that afternoon, she joined him in the wine cellar, not to help, just to watch. He worked in silence, wiping bottles, checking dates, reviewing stock. She leaned against the wooden beams, arms crossed, a small smile resting on her lips. "I like watching you do what you love," she said. He looked over at her. "I love that you see me while I do it." There was no big moment, no long kiss, just two people choosing not to hide anymore, choosing not to perform, choosing presence. Dinner was quiet, no candles this time, no porch, just the wooden kitchen table inside, a soft bulb overhead, and the windows open wide to let in the evening air. Zarya helped him cook this time, not because he needed it, but because she wanted to be close. She peeled garlic slowly while he diced tomatoes. Their hands brushed once over the sink. Neither pulled away. No music played, but there was harmony in how they moved, how they passed bowls back and forth, how they didn't fill the space with unnecessary talk. After eating, they left the plates stacked by the sink and walked out to the vineyard again. No jackets, no shoes, just bare feet in the grass and a glass of red each, the kind that lingered on the tongue. The moon was high, full and clear. They didn't go far. They sat on a wide blanket spread between the rows of vines. A lantern flickered gently beside them, dim enough to not disturb the quiet. Zarya lay back, her curls splaying softly across the woven fabric. Luca stretched beside her, one hand resting on his chest, the other brushing her knuckles. She looked up at the sky. "I don't think I've ever heard silence this clear." "It's not silence," he said. "No. It's what comes after everything loud falls away." She turned her face to him. "That's what you are." He looked over. She continued, "You're the space that's left after all the noise stops." Luca didn't reply with words. He simply reached over and pulled her hand to his chest, placing it over his heartbeat. And they stayed like that. Still, present, tethered by something invisible but undeniable. They didn't rush back inside. Even when the air got colder, they layered the blanket over their legs and leaned into each other. She didn't ask what this meant. He didn't ask where it was going. But when she rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, she whispered, "I didn't come here looking for anything." He nodded. "I didn't give you anything that asked you to stay, but I still want to." He turned his head. "Then stay." They walked back to the house around midnight. No conversation needed. She followed him into the bedroom again. Familiar now, but still sacred. The bed was unmade from the night before. She pulled the robe from her shoulders slowly and climbed in. He joined her seconds later, brushing her thigh with the back of his hand, then pulling her against him. They kissed only once that night, but it lasted. His hand cupped her jaw. Her fingers rested on his chest, and even after the kiss ended, they didn't pull away. They didn't make love again that night, not because they didn't want to, but because presence didn't always require more. Sometimes the deepest intimacy is knowing someone doesn't need to be touched to feel held. In the dark, her voice came softly. "If I woke up tomorrow and this was over, I'd still feel like I came home." Luca whispered against her ear, "It's not over. And you're not going anywhere." She breathed in his words like they were oxygen, and slept. Safe. Zarya woke before the sun did. The sky was a pale blue-grey outside the window. The vineyard still slept, shadows long and soft across the land. Inside, the house was quiet, save for the steady rhythm of Luca's breath against her shoulder. She didn't move. Not for several minutes. His arm was wrapped gently around her waist, his leg hooked around hers. Their bodies molded like they were used to finding each other in the dark. For once, she didn't feel the urge to pull away first. She didn't wonder what time it was. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need answers. She had presence, and it felt better than anything she used to chase. When he stirred, he didn't startle. He leaned in and kissed her bare shoulder, slow and warm. "You're still here," he whispered. "I didn't want to move." "I'm glad you didn't." She turned toward him in the sheets. Their foreheads touched. No makeup, no pretending, just skin, eyes, and comfort. They didn't speak again until after the shower. Zarya wrapped herself in one of his robes, soft, oversized, dark green. She padded barefoot into the kitchen where he was already at the stove, flipping pancakes. "Look at you," she teased. "Domestic." He looked over his shoulder. "You think I own a vineyard but can't feed the woman I'm sleeping next to?" She grinned. "I didn't say all that." He turned back to the pan. "I like making breakfast for people I trust." She paused at the table, that quiet line settling over her chest. "Thank you," she said. He glanced at her again. "I meant it." They ate together as the sun rose, light spilling into the kitchen and casting long shadows across the wood floors. Afterward, she helped him rinse plates. No offer, no question, just instinct. Then they stepped out to the porch, both with mugs of tea, and sat on the steps, barefoot, side by side, no urgency, no decision looming. Zarya stared out at the early morning mist floating just above the vines. "I've always been afraid of needing someone," she said suddenly. Luca looked at her. She didn't flinch. "But I think I was confusing needing with wanting. And I think it's okay to want someone who meets you where you are, instead of reshaping you." He set his mug down and reached for her hand. He didn't squeeze. He just held it. "I don't want to shape you," he said. "I want to make room for you." That landed deep. So she didn't speak. She just leaned her head against his shoulder and let the words breathe. They stayed there until the breeze turned warmer. She eventually stood, kissed his forehead and said, "I'm going to walk." "Alone?" She nodded. "I'll be here," he said. She walked through the vineyard slowly, fingers brushing the leaves, feet kicking soft dust as she moved through the rows. She wasn't thinking about forever. She wasn't planning tomorrow. She was fully inside the moment, and when she turned back to look at the house, she saw him, standing by the porch, watching. Not waiting, not asking, just present. And in that stillness, something between them finally rooted. Not like a spark, but like something lasting. That evening, Zarya helped Luka cook again. Same rhythm, same kitchen, same calm. The way they moved around each other had changed. Closer now, quieter. They didn't need to ask for space. They gave it instinctively. He chopped basil. She stirred the sauce. He leaned in once to kiss her shoulder, and she didn't flinch. She just smiled and kept stirring. No tension, no overthinking. Just a comfort that hadn't asked to be earned. It had simply shown up and stayed. After dinner, they returned to the porch. No plans, no big talk. They sat shoulder to shoulder, her knees pulled up, his arm draped lazily across the back of the bench. The night sky stretched wide, stars blinking in patterns they didn't name. Zarya glanced sideways at him. "Do you ever wish you met someone like me sooner?" Luka thought about it for a moment, then shook his head gently. "No, you wouldn't have been ready for me then, and I wouldn't have known how to hold you." She nodded slowly. "Me neither." Then she added, "And I don't want to hold you. I want to sit next to you. That's enough." He turned toward her. Eyes steady. No smile. Just respect. "I'll sit here as long as you'll let me." Later, they stood by the kitchen window finishing their tea. The room was quiet. So was the space between them. Zarya reached for his hand and laced their fingers. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "You don't need to," he replied. "I'm not trying to build a fantasy. I'm not trying to be one." She turned to face him. "Then let's keep doing this. Real, slow, present." His response came without hesitation. Yes. They didn't seal it with a kiss, or a promise, or a label. They sealed it by returning to the porch. 2 glasses, 2 chairs, 1 shared stillness, and the knowledge that something between them had chosen to stay, not out of need, not out of longing, but out of a deeper knowing, that whatever this was, it mattered. Zarya didn't chase love. She let it meet her, when she was finally still enough to feel it, and this time, she stayed. If this story touched something quiet in you, if you've ever shared a moment that felt small but stayed with you, if you've ever been seen without having to explain yourself, then this wasn't just a story. This was a reminder. Comment. What moment from this story stayed with you the longest? Like this video if you believe real love doesn't rush. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more emotionally powerful stories that stay long after the screen fades. Share this with someone who knows how it feels to be held, without having to be fixed.